He has never been very interested in trying to promote himself, which in a way is a pity, because his work should be known much better.
The example that John sets in his behaviour and his attitudes toward things and his values, that's a lesson, but it's a gift as well.
People were much more used to seeing photography used in a social documentary sense or in the advertising or portrait way. But here was somebody who was looking at the lyrical and the poetic aspects of photography.
If you simply put a mirror up to nature, and exactly as it is, and show people what they could have seen if they went there and had a look at it themselves, well, I suppose it's a bit like a travelogue. But if you take it in black and white, you've removed a little bit of their reality. So now they've got to put a bit of reality back. They've got to start to interpret a black and white photograph.
I always liked this work because it's probably a strange word to use, but it had solidity. It was very solid. There was no rubbish about it. John would have been totally lost in the digital revolution because there's no manipulation. It's just what he sees becomes something totally new. The way he looks at a tree or a patch of soil or rain running through the sand. It's very powerful close-ups.
You do sense him as a very astute and a very sensitive observer of nature and of the essential forces of nature. And I think that undeniably has a spiritual quality to it. There were other photographers in Australia who were working with extended series and the natural world in the same way that John was, perhaps a little bit later than them, sort of the mid-70s. But I think really John was the first person to do that and to explore in a highly lyrical fashion what it was that made a tree and a rock. So that you often go on what feels like a voyage with him. It slows you down as a viewer when you work over, 53 prints as he does with Earth Song and a slightly smaller series with Tree, A Journey. Tree, A Journey is a very good title because in fact you do take a journey with this work. You move from observing the tree as you would in the landscape right through to an almost microscopic analysis of the tree. And do you, by the end of it, get the sense of, the physical properties of a tree? Yes, you do. But I think it's more than that. You're actually plugging into some essential quality of life. And that's really something that John has explored throughout all of his work.
To my mind, I can remember at the time thinking, it's like kind of trying to pull a tooth. He's trying to articulate what for him is truly significant in the landscape. But all he's got to work with is the landscape. So there was a kind of a deeply contradictory thing in the pictures, which was one of the most interesting aspects of it for me, to watch that go over and over and over the rocks, or over and over and over the surfaces of these trees, and go on and on and on. And there's this constant doubling back to try and to find what it is.
I I want something to ask questions. And I always found that questions are much, much more interesting than answers. I don't like getting answers. I just want the question. I knew that I wanted to make a series of photographs that would explore the elements of landscape. And I could only think of 5 elements. So I said, well, I've got to give myself time to do it. I'll give myself 10 years to do it, 2 years for each chapter. And I did it in 8. And maybe men have a menopause, and I went through it. And I just wanted to wipe. It was almost like a divorce. I wanted to wipe that away.
Anybody else would have made a public bonfire in the village square. John did it very quietly, you know.
I looked at, okay, I've got one life. My father's just lost his, my mother's just lost hers. What the hell am I doing? And I thought, well, I'm standing behind a camera. For the camera, place a bench in Myer menswear. And instead of selling things through a camera commercially, I was standing behind a bloody counter selling neckties. Might have been just the same. And I thought, no, this isn't the way to go. I've got to get out of this.
He got sucked into that gave him a living, and it was something, but his heart and soul was never in it. His heart and soul were, you know, once a year he went on these amazing tours, and he would get right into the desert with Dawn, and they would live for a month or two away from any type of civilization. And that's where he photographed, and that's where he came to life.
25 years of commercial photography, which I loved. I just felt it wasn't right. I don't want you to misunderstand that I had some snooty idea about it.
I can totally understand that he one day decided, well, I don't want to see this anymore, that's where my heart is. Because John is far too honest, too real, to actually live this sort of double life that a lot of people have to do. They compromise from morn till night because that's the name of the game, you know. He never did, or he did it, and then, yes, I understand totally that he burned a lot.
I camped by that waterhole over 4 years for a total of 40 days. I exposed 3 rolls of film and got 11 photographs. But you only had half an hour to shoot. You started shooting the moment the sun got up, and when it had been up for about half an hour, the heat would drag a breeze up the gully and your shot was gone. The moment that water ruffled, you'd had it.
I think some of those photographs. And he was not a clicker as you have now, you know. He would think about the very shot he would take at 10 minutes past 4 the same day. He would think about it the whole day and then finally set his camera up and take that one photograph.
I love reflection that is another world. And this shadow, reflection, reality, I don't know, I never tire of looking at it, thinking about it. I just think mirrors are wonderful things, and I admire a narcissist for starting it all. You are duty bound to hand-on experience. You do it to your own kids. Why can't you do it to the kids next door? I thought suddenly I found some reason for doing what I'm doing. And I got there and did it for 12 months and loved it.
Yeah, it was sort of going down into the dungeon of the building, which was quite funny actually. You know, you'd had these different levels at Paran, and painting was on F floor, and I imagine they had good south light up on F floor, and there were the workshops and the sculpture workshops on ground level, and the base of the smoke-filled basement was where the photography occurred. So it's sort of John came out of the smoke, sort of talking to someone, and that's probably my first impression.
Ethra and I brought John in. He became very popular with the students. Students loved him. He always had time. He was very giving, very understanding. He was a brilliant teacher.
John was always, he had a very matter-of-fact manner too, which helped to cut through the bullshit, I think. Because art schools at the time were full of pseudo-intellectual claptrap. I mean, even then, it's worse now, I think. But John would sort of slice through that with a look and a few questions.
It was absolutely the halcyon days of Paran. John brought to his lectures an incredible depth of knowledge, wisdom, philosophy that went way beyond what you would expect from a normal, whatever that is, photography lecture. Yes, there was valuable information about technique, about the work of other photographers, all of those things that you would expect. But there was also this broad, deep information about music, poetry, literature. It was an extraordinary experience.
One of my other memories at Paran was their interest in music, or the importance of music, in our lives generally, but the important effect it could have on the mind of a visual artist or someone who made pictures. What we were talking about was how, in a great symphony, a composer would get the whole world into a picture. So when conversations went off on a tangent like that, I enjoyed my time at, down on A floor a great deal. But I'd fill up with a conversation or impressions like that, and then I'd just have to go away and work out my own ideas.
Ethel and I advised Bill that he really shouldn't stay on, to actually leave the college and go out and continue doing what he was doing. You can quite easily mess up a student. You can influence them. It's very hard not to influence. I didn't teach Bill a thing. I'm quite sure I didn't. I don't think Ethel taught him anything. He was a freak, and I think it continues. He did come into, I think, the best output of students that I've ever had. It was quite obvious from the first 2 weeks that I had an unusual group.
And as you know, from all the teachers you've had in your life and all your education you've had, you probably remember only 1 or 2 people that stood out and said something worthwhile. The rest was all to be forgotten quick smart. So John had quite an influence on a lot of people.
There are a great many sculptors and painters as well as photographers out there who are senior members of the community whose work and whose contribution to the culture of this country is not really acknowledged. I don't think that they receive the respect and the recognition that they deserve. Not just in the case of John, certainly. I mean, John, is an important sort of creative artist in the history of this country, but the same could be said for a range of sculptors and painters who, it seems to me, almost have to turn their back on the art world and the broader public and retreat into the hills to sort of garden and feed chooks and things.
Well, you got to have a PR person and you got to have a lot of bullshit. He has neither. John is a very straight, wonderful man, and he's very honest. And he doesn't make up all sort of fibs.
I think one of the hallmarks of John as a person is that he's very sensitive. He's a very sensitive observer. And I think he has a very deep spirituality to him. Now, whether that's a spirituality in sense of an organised religion, I think perhaps not. But he is a great believer in goodness, shall we say, and in life and in a positive energy. And certainly in all my dealings with John, there have always been very heartfelt kind of expressions of him as an individual.
It was an amazing experience sitting there in those 3-hour lectures and absorbing all of that information and what it did to us, what it brought to our photography.
One of the great sadnesses is by not honouring and celebrating the older artists in a community or in a society, you lose some of that depth of experience and that depth of knowledge. And so not just from a sort of a general sort of moral standpoint, but from the point of view of just sheer information, it constantly undercuts people's self-awareness. They just don't know anything about it. They think they know something. Of course, the less they know, the more they think they know. And of course, the great lesson that people like John teach you when you're a student is that the more you know, the more you realise how little you know. That's the wisdom.
But I would say he was the most significant teacher there. Had a great impact on the right sort of people. They would all remember him with great love and devotion, more or less.